I was wrong about the sound. I thought it would be loud shouting. Maybe something thrown across the room, the kind of scene you see in films where everything breaks at once. But the sound that hit me first was laughter. My wife's laughter. Light and easy, like I'd just told a joke at a barbecue. She was sitting on his lap, in my lounge room. In the house I'd paid the mortgage on for 26 years. She was sitting on his lap with a glass of red wine in her hand, and she was laughing. And she held out the papers to me like she was offering a menu. "Just sign it, Bernard," she said. "Stop being dramatic." His name was Colt, 41 years old. He sold luxury cars in the city. He had the kind of tan you get from weekends on a boat, not from working outside. He didn't look at me when I walked in. He just kept one hand on my wife's waist and looked at his phone. I'm 63 now. I was 62 then. I'd been married to Lynette for 31 years. I stood in the doorway of my own lounge room for what felt like a very long time. The papers were still extended toward me, her manicured fingers, nails done in that pale pink she'd started wearing the previous year. I remembered thinking at the time that it didn't suit her, that it looked too young for her, and then I'd felt guilty for thinking it. I walked over. I took the papers. She smiled. "See? Easy." I read the first page, then the second. She made a sound of impatience. "Bernard, honestly, it's straightforward. You get the ute and your tools. I keep the house. We split the super 50-50. You want the house," I said. "I've always wanted the house." "You know that." I did know that. It was the one thing she'd said consistently throughout our marriage, that the house was hers. That she'd made it what it was. That my name on the mortgage was just a formality. She'd chosen every tile, every curtain, every plant in the garden. I'd agreed with her. I'd let her. I'd thought it was a kindness. I looked at Colt. He finally looked up from his phone. His expression was the one men use when they're trying to look neutral, but actually feel contempt. "Take your time, mate," he said. I put the papers down on the coffee table. "I'll have my solicitor look at these," I said. Lynette's smile thinned. "Bernard, I'll have my solicitor look at them," I said again. "I'll be in touch." I walked out to my ute. I sat in the driveway for a while. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I didn't cry, but I wasn't calm either. I was something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for yet. I drove to my brother's place in the hills. His name is Warren. I've called him Waza my whole life. He's 4 years younger than me, and he has the sensible head in the family, always has. His wife, Denise, made tea without asking, and then left us to it, which is something I've always loved about her. I told Warren everything. He listened without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds. When I finished, he said, "What do they think the house is worth?" She mentioned $850, I said. "Maybe $9, he nodded slowly. "And the super?" "About $240 each if they split it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And she doesn't know about Dad's trust." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "Our father, Ronald Ashby, died 7 years before this. He was a quiet man who never spoke about money. He'd grown up during the Depression, and it shaped the way he thought about everything. He worked in hardware his entire life, owned his own shop, never spent more than he needed to. When he died, we discovered that he had quietly, methodically, over the course of 40 years, placed his assets into a family trust. The trust was managed by a trustee, a solicitor named Fletcher, who'd been Dad's friend since their 20s. The structure was old and solid, and entirely legal. The assets in it included a commercial property in the outer suburbs, 2 rural blocks that had been leased to farming operations for years, and a managed investment portfolio that had been quietly compounding since the late 80s. The total value of the trust, at the time Lynette handed me those divorce papers, was just under $2.4 million. My name was one of 3 beneficiaries. Warren and our sister, June, were the other 2. Lynette had no idea. In 31 years of marriage, I had never told her. Not because I was hiding it from her at first. In the early years, I hadn't thought about it much. Dad was alive. The trust was his business. It wasn't something I walked around thinking about. Then, as the years went on, something shifted. I'd noticed things. The way Lynette talked about money always in terms of what it could get her, what it said about a person, what it meant to have it. I'd watched her look at other women's jewelry at Christmas parties and come home quiet and brittle. I'd heard her on the phone to her sister, talking about people we knew with a kind of inventory in her voice, tallying up what they had. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself she loved me, not money. But I never told her about the trust. My dad had said something to me once, maybe 5 years before he passed. We were sitting on his back veranda in Ballarat, and he was having a beer, watching the light go off the paddock behind his fence. "Bernard," he said, "money shows you who people are. Not having it shows you. Having it shows you too. But the moment someone finds out you might have it, that's when you really see them." I didn't think much of it at the time. He was a man of few words, and sometimes they didn't land until years later. That one landed the morning I sat in Warren's kitchen. I called Fletcher the next day. He'd known me since I was a boy. I explained the situation. "She'll have no claim on the trust," he said. "It's structured correctly. The assets were never in your personal name and never commingled with matrimonial assets. Her solicitor can try, but they won't get far." "What about the house?" I asked. "You'll likely lose the house," he said, "or you'll need to negotiate hard. But the trust," he paused. "The trust is protected. I hired a solicitor, a woman named Frances. Sharp, patient, thorough. She read the papers Lynette had given me and made a small sound that I can only describe as professional disdain. "This is written as though you have no leverage," she said. "She thought I didn't," I said. Frances looked at me over her reading glasses. "Well," she said, "that's going to be an interesting conversation." The conversation happened about 3 weeks later. My solicitor contacted Lynette's solicitor. I wasn't there for it, but Frances called me afterward and told me what happened. Lynette's solicitor had asked, as part of standard disclosure, for a full accounting of my assets. Frances had provided it. The call, as it was described to me, had gone very quiet. That evening, Lynette rang me directly. I was at Warren's. I nearly didn't answer. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded hollowed out. Somehow. Like something had been taken from her that she hadn't known she'd been counting on. "Tell you what," I said. "Bernard. It was my father's," I said. "It wasn't mine to tell. It still isn't mine. Not entirely. $2.4 million. And you never thought to mention it." "I thought about it," I said. "And then I thought about why you'd want to know." She went quiet. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to punish her. It was just the truth, stated plainly. And sometimes the truth sounds brutal when it arrives late. She said, "Colt and I are going to build something together." "Good luck to you both," I said. I meant it. Or I was trying to. I found out later through Warren, who heard it from her sister's husband, that Colt had debts. Not small ones. A business loan gone wrong. A failed property development in Queensland that had cost him significantly. He'd been circling Lynette for well over a year. He drove a nice car and wore nice clothes and talked about the future in a way that made people feel like they were already in it with him. When Lynette's solicitor disclosed the trust structure and it became clear that nothing from it would be accessible to Lynette, let alone to someone she'd only been with for a matter of months, Colt apparently became very difficult to reach. It took about 6 weeks before she told her sister he'd stopped returning her calls. I don't say this with satisfaction. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to feel satisfied and dress it up as something else. But mostly, what I felt was tired. Tired and a little sad for the person she used to be, or the person I thought she used to be. The settlement took 8 months. Lynette kept the house, as she'd wanted. I kept my tools and my ute, and considerably more besides. We split the superannuation. The trust remained entirely untouched. I moved into a rental in the Dandenong Ranges while I worked out what I wanted. The place was small, a weatherboard cottage with a wood heater and a back deck that looked into the bush. I'd spend evenings out there with a beer, listening to the birds settle in the trees. And I'd think about 31 years and what you do with the shape of them once they're finished. My daughter Sasha was 27 at the time. She'd known something had been wrong in the marriage for years. She told me that afterward. She'd watched her mother for years and understood things I hadn't let myself understand. She came and stayed with me for a weekend in the cottage, and we cooked on the little gas stove and talked properly for the first time in years. "Were you ever happy, Dad?" she asked. Not unkindly, just wanting to know. I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "I think I was. For a long time, I was." "I'm glad," she said. My son, Callum, took longer. He was 30 at the time, and he'd always been closer to his mother. For a while, he was cold toward me, and I understood it. I didn't push. I just kept showing up birthdays, Christmas, a Sunday roast every few months when he'd let me. Eventually, about a year after the settlement, we were having a beer at his place, and he said quietly, "She told me about the money, about what you'd never said." "Right," I said. "She made it sound like a betrayal," he said. "I know she would have." He was quiet for a moment. "Was it?" I looked at my son. I thought about how to answer him honestly. "I didn't hide it to hurt her," I said. "I kept it to myself because I wanted to be sure of something, and I kept waiting to be sure. And the years went by, and I never was." He sat with that for a while. Then he said, "Sure of what?" "Sure of why she loved me," I said. Callum didn't say anything for a long time after that. But when he left that evening, he hugged me at the door, and the coldness was gone. Lynette lives in our old house still. I've driven past it once. Not intentionally, I was cutting through the suburb on the way to a job, and I went past without thinking. Someone had repainted the front fence. It was a different color than we'd had it, lighter. It looked fine. It looked like someone else's house. I don't wish her harm. I want to be honest about that too. I spent 31 years with this woman. I know how she takes her tea and the sound she makes when she's just fallen asleep and the way she laughs when something genuinely surprises her. That doesn't disappear just because the marriage ends. It changes shape, but it doesn't disappear. But I also know that on the evening she held out those divorce papers, she was sitting on another man's lap in my lounge room, and she was laughing. And she thought she was taking everything. She thought I had nothing else. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness, or not only with bitterness, but with a kind of clarity that I didn't have before. I know now that my father was right. Not about money itself. Money isn't wisdom, and having it doesn't make you a better person. And I've known plenty of people with none who had more dignity than anyone I've ever met, but about what the knowledge of it reveals. About what people show you when they think the game has changed. I'm 63. I live in a house I bought outright in the hills, 30 minutes from Warren and Denise, 20 minutes from Sasha, an hour from Callum. I have a wood shed out the back and a workshop where I spend most Saturday mornings. I've started keeping a vegetable garden, which I never had time for before. The tomatoes this year were extraordinary. I'm not going to tell you I'm completely at peace with how things went. 31 years is not nothing. A marriage that ends, even one that should have ended, leaves a kind of scar tissue that you carry around quietly. Some mornings I wake up and the weight of it sits on my chest for a moment before I remember what my life is now and what it isn't. But then I get up. I make tea. I go out to the back deck. And the bellbirds are doing what they always do. And the light is coming through the gum trees the way it does on a clear morning. And it occurs to me, not dramatically, just as a quiet fact, that I'm all right. That I'm genuinely, without performance, all right. If you're watching this and you're in something that isn't working, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not qualified for that. But I'll tell you what I learned, because I think it's worth saying. Don't let someone's certainty become your silence. I kept quiet for years, not because I was strategic, not because I was planning anything, but because I had a habit of making myself smaller so the people around me would feel bigger. That's not love. That's something else, and it has a cost, and you pay it slowly over a very long time without noticing until one day the bill arrives all at once. Know what you're worth. I don't mean that financially, although I'd say that too. Talk to a solicitor. Understand what you have before you're sitting in a driveway wondering. I mean who you are. What you've built, what you've quietly carried. Don't let someone hand you papers and assume you'll sign without understanding what you're giving away. And be honest with the people who matter. Not weaponized honesty. Not honesty as revenge. Just the plain kind. The kind that costs something to give. I was not honest with my wife for a long time. Not about the things that really mattered. And I regret that. Not because it would have saved the marriage, I don't think it would have. But because I owed it to myself to be seen clearly. And I didn't give myself that chance. The bellbirds are still going outside. Sasha is coming for lunch. Callum rang yesterday to tell me his partner is pregnant. I'm going to be a grandfather, which is something I hadn't let myself hope for while everything else was falling apart. Life has a way of continuing. It's not a small thing. That, to anyone who's been told they have nothing left, look again, look carefully. You might be surprised what's been quietly growing all along. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand philosophical way. I'm a tradesman from the hills, not a professor. But sitting on that back deck in the evenings, I've come to understand something simple. What you do quietly, over a long time, accumulates. It becomes the ground you're standing on when everything else shakes loose. Lynette made her choices. She chose Colt. She chose the performance of that evening. The wine, the papers, the laughter. She chose to believe that the measure of a man was what you could see on the surface, and those choices had a weight to them that she didn't feel until much later, when the ground she thought she was standing on turned out to be nothing but assumption. That's not punishment, that's just how things work. What we build in secret, the integrity we keep when no one's watching. The promises we honor when there's no applause for it, that becomes real. That becomes solid. And what we perform for an audience, what we dress up to look like something it isn't, eventually shows itself for what it is. I wasn't a saint in that marriage. I want to be straight about that. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I made myself smaller than I needed to, thinking it was generosity when really it was avoidance. There's a kind of cowardice that looks like patience, and I practiced it for years. That's on me. Wisdom isn't just about knowing things, it's about having the courage to act on what you know. And I didn't always have that courage. But here's what I did have. I knew who I was. Not loudly, not in a way I announced to anyone, but quietly, the way my father knew who he was. He went to work every day in a hardware shop, and he never needed anyone to tell him he mattered. He just lived like he did. That kind of knowing, that's not arrogance, it's a spine. And when the moment came that I needed one, it turned out I had it, because he'd shown me what it looked like. If I could say one thing to anyone going through something similar, it would be this. The strength you've been building quietly, through the ordinary days, when nobody was watching, that's real. That counts. Don't let a single dramatic evening make you forget what you've accumulated. Don't let someone's certainty about who you are replace your own. Sasha asked me once if I was happy now. I told her I was getting there. That was honest. I'm not going to pretend everything wrapped up neatly. 31 years leaves marks. But I'm building something now that's genuinely mine. And I know what it's built on. And that makes all the difference. Callum's going to be a father. I'm going to be a grandfather. Warren and Denise are coming for a roast on Sunday. The tomatoes are doing something remarkable this year. The ground beneath me is solid. I put it there, year by year, without fanfare. And when they tried to take everything, it turned out there was a great deal they couldn't touch. That's the only lesson I know how to give.